How do we know that God is working when he isn't speaking? And how does Esther point us to Jesus? Let's chat. Hey, Becca.
Hello, hello.
Thanks for sitting down and chatting a little bit more about your sermon on the book of Esther. Very long and drawn out book over many, many chapters.
All 10 of them.
Right, all 10 of them.
Yeah.
But a very densely packed 10 chapters.
10.
Yeah, 10
Yeah.
chapters. A lot of history there.
Kind of feels to me like a reality TV show in 10 chapters. Like there's so much that happens, and like it's either like reality TV or Shakespearean or something like that. There's like so much drama. It's very entertaining.
Yeah, right off the bat, we have the current queen coming in, refusing to do some inappropriate stuff that the king is demanding.
Yeah.
And then that
Gotta watch those kings.
Yeah, paves the way for Esther to become queen, which is kind of a crazy sort of story.
And it's a long process too, because so Queen Vashti, the original queen who was married to King Xerxes or Jerxes, as you've referred to him as, is they're at a party and she refuses to like take her clothes off in front of him and his friends, and like good for her, by the way. And so he's like, you know what, we need a new queen, all because she just wouldn't do what he said. But that's how it was back then. And then he comes up with all these new decrees about how women now have to do whatever men say, and horrible turn in society. But in all of that, we see Esther kind of pop up. And the reason she pops up is because the king had put out a decree that all available and eligible women need to come to the palace and go through this like long beautification process before meeting the king. And he's gonna, from all of these women, pick his next queen.
Oh, wow.
Kind of like Emperor's New Groove.
I was thinking The Bachelor, but
yeah, that too. And I was like, I wonder if Emperor's New Groove is written kind of by out of Esther. Like I'm just now like piecing all of that together. But
interesting.
Yeah, now I need to go watch that. I love that movie. But yeah, so it's just very dramatic, very Shakespearean, very symbolic. Lots of stuff in there. So I couldn't go through everything. I tried to summarize the best I could. But yeah, it's a really entertaining book to read.
Was there anything that like you wanted to mention but ended up getting left out?
So if you haven't seen the sermon, I'd recommend watching the sermon first before this video, just because there's lots of content that I'm not talking about right now. But Haman, the bad guy in the story, he's referred to as like the snake, or just kind of this pompous, very fragile ego kind of guy. And he gets really mad because Esther's uncle Mordecai like won't bow down to Haman at one of his celebrations. So it's a big thing. And ultimately, the goal is to get rid of Haman because of that incident. Haman decides he's going to just go and get the king to sign off on killing all the Jewish people and basically commit genocide. He has this whole plan. The king signs off on it. The king doesn't know Esther's Jewish. Like, it's this whole ordeal. But then Haman kind of gets caught trying to sleep with Esther or rape her. Trigger warning. Should have come first. Sorry. And the king comes in and basically is like, what is going on? And she's like, told you he was bad news.
Right.
And then that ultimately is what leads to Haman getting kind of killed and put to death for what he did or what he tried to do to Esther. And then Esther's able to have the king's ear and get everything sort of reversed. The decree that he had made with Haman. So it's this really long, dramatic story, but like I didn't share that in my sermon just for like trigger purposes or trigger warnings, and just we have students in the room, and you know it can be a really tough subject to talk about. So I told them, go read it. Go. There's more juicy details here that kind of play into the story that you might want to read. So we'll see.
That's actually really interesting. You mentioned that he's kind of described as a snake. And the prophecy that God gives Adam and Eve is that someone from their line will crush the head of the snake. And so that ultimately ends up being Jesus. But Esther kind of almost gets there. Like, she doesn't exactly crush the head of the snake, but it's kind of like a situational sort of thing. Sounds like
symbolic.
She was a part of it. and a part of his sort of like demise.
Yep.
But the king also plays a role. So it's like, how does Esther, I guess, sort of point to Jesus? Like, what is she? She seems to like almost be that person who crushes the head of the snake, versus a lot of people in our series who are like, oh wow, these are really great guys, and then they really mess up. But Esther is not a guy. And actually gets really kind of close to being that savior for her people, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I noticed in this sermon series as well. There was like, here's all these like symbolic, almost Jesus-like figures. And I think the reason we have that is because Israel was looking for this particular type of savior, someone to save them from their enemies, this kind of like warish, like male godly figure that was going to come in and defeat their enemies and be king and all this kind of stuff, right? But also that's just a very temporary solution. And so when Jesus comes in on a donkey with just this lineage that, if you actually look and investigate like Jesus's lineage, you'll see that he has Moabite in him, and which is like I think direct descent of like Canaanites, and like it's all of this like which Israelites and Canaanites have this like beef, and it's a whole thing, right? So when you look at it, Jesus was like nothing that the Israelites were really looking for. And so he came and shattered these like perceptions of what a good God or good king or savior would look like. And so I think it's interesting that Esther also kind of shatters similar ceilings, being a woman, being Jewish in a Persian community, being considered less than, outcast, her and her people up for genocide. So yeah, she is a redeemer and a savior of her people. And from what we read from her story, now we know she's not perfect because she's human, but we don't see a spot where she necessarily went wrong. Where in all the other stories that we see throughout this Help Wanted series, there's like serious markers of failure.
Right.
So symbolic, but not quite enough. And so then it's interesting that Jesus is kind of the last one in this, Esther is the last one in this series before we get to the story of Jesus. Because she's the closest that we can get. And I think the reason it's not perfect is because it's just a temporary solution. She doesn't live forever, right?
Yeah.
Not that Jesus, lived in human form forever, but he died, defeated death, rose again, and then ascended to heaven. So it's that perception. So I think that's why Esther's story is so interesting, because it is a very close symbolic representation of what's to come, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Did that
really
answer
good.
your question?
Yeah.
Okay, good,
No,
good.
That's great. Yeah. So Esther points to Jesus in a lot of ways, and she really goes out on a limb a lot. And kind of similar to Queen Vashti. But Queen Esther kind of goes out on a limb, and you use the phrase that she leveraged her privilege. Could you talk about what that looks like a little bit more?
Yeah, so I think in this instance, we see, privilege is where you have kind of an upper hand over maybe somebody else. And so in this instance, Queen Esther has the privilege of being queen. She has the king's ear. And because of that, she has an opportunity or a privilege where she could potentially save her people that her other Jewish, peers wouldn't have. They didn't have any power. They didn't have any say. They couldn't even protect themselves like legally. If someone were to come and like try and steal from them, they had no right to protect themselves. So that's something that ultimately Esther does, is not only does she protect her people from genocide, but she ends up, it's kind of a long story, but Haman basically gets the king to sign off on them becoming his slaves or his property, and then he can kill them at his disposal. And when Haman is put to death, the king gives Queen Esther all of Haman's estate, meaning she actually gets her people.
Wow.
And then she can equip them, and then they can protect themselves. So it's this really interesting, very smart story. And so because she's in this place where she has leverage and privilege, she's using that for good. And I think that's an inspiration to people today of if you have a privilege over someone else, use it for good. Don't use it to check out. Don't use it to kind of keep just yourself safe, right? Like we have opportunities to protect other people, to care for other people. Let's use it for like my example, I have a platform where I can talk and speak and give messages that maybe other women can't. And so using my platform as a way to encourage other women and protect other women and speak up for other women or share stories of the Bible of strong women that brought us our Savior and point to our Savior is the way I can use that privilege. So.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I know that privilege is something that is often kind of just baked into a culture as well. And so the fact that we see in this story, in the way that you're teaching the story, kind of those with privilege kind of lowering themselves to elevate other people and kind of make things much more equitable. I think that's something to really be proud of in your teaching. I think that's really good.
Thank you.
And I mean, you even mentioned the lineage of Jesus. There's a very popular lineage that actually traces Jesus's ancestors through the patterns of women, which was like totally outside of how lineages were supposed to be tracked during that time. But there was women of other cultures and women through adoption and prostitutes. Lots of elevation of women. And so, I mean, we only talked about one woman who points us to Jesus in this series, but we've also done series dedicated to women of the Bible. What is it that we as a church, but not just FCC, but Christians in general, how can we kind of lean into that more to learn more about the women of the Bible who aren't as heavily featured as men because of the culture it was written in?
That's a great question. Actually, the young adults group and myself, we've been going through a Women of the Bible kind of study on Tuesday nights, and for the last like 4 months, right? Yeah, 4 months. We're almost in April, so almost 4 months. And just kind of going through all these different women, and we've done a podcast on it, a couple different episodes of talking about women of the Bible, including Jesus's lineage, and it is one of the only lineages that we have, at least in the Bible, that speaks of the women that brought us Jesus. And I think it's important to recognize these stories of women because from what I see, there's so much courage and there's so much more sacrifice that women have to sacrifice. No, that's not how I want to say that. Women have to sacrifice so much more than the average male counterpart because they had so much less opportunities offered to them. So the fact that all of these, women in the Bible were speaking up or doing this or doing that or whatever it was and showing this courage, like they were risking their entire life that maybe their male counterpart wouldn't have had to risk to do something like in the same vein. So I think it's not only worth talking about, but worth celebrating and like learning from these women that truly put everything on the line to bring us Jesus, to bring us the gospel, and stood up for what they believed was right. Not that the male stories aren't as important, but I think just knowing how much more women had to sacrifice to do the same things, to me, just makes it that much more impactful and inspiring, I guess.
Well, thank you for sharing a little bit more. I really appreciate it, and I learned a lot.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.